Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi. This is Scope. In the first segment of today's show, we're going to discuss the quote-unquote Middle East peace plan as presented by Donald Trump standing beside Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Now, the reactions have continued to pour in ever since that, quote, deal of the century as formed by Jared Kushner and others in the Trump administration, as well as, of course, Israeli officials, was presented to the world in greater detail than before. We've now had reactions, of course, coming from the European Union, as well as the OIC and other such bodies around the world who have rejected it. And then we've had now the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, also speaking at the United Nations Security Council, saying that essentially this would leave a Swiss cheese state for the Palestinians. And it's hard to really argue with that analogy that he's presented, because when you look at the map that was presented along with the plan for this apparent two-state solution, as the Trump administration would have you believe, it's really hard to see how this is viable in any way. Let's now put this to our panelists who are joining us. We're joined now by Gideon Levy, who is a journalist. He's joining us now from Tel Aviv. Joining us from Perth in Australia is Jafar Ramini, who is a political analyst and Palestinian writer. And also joining us then from Istanbul is Hassan bin Imran, who is a political analyst and journalist as well. Hassan, Jafar, and Gideon, thank you to all three of you for your time today. Hassan, let me start with you. What do you make of the reactions ever since this plan has been revealed? It seems, on a large part at least, that many countries around the world were sort of taken aback that this is what was presented, that this is what was being worked on and was spoken of in such, in such terms by the Trump administration, that this would solve all the issues between Israelis and Palestinians almost just at the click of a button. What do you make of that?
I think that this is unprecedentedly the most insulting peace offering that has ever been made to any party. And let's get this straight. This plan has not been made by the U.S. It has been presented by the U.S., but it was so obvious that President Trump was reading it for the first time. The wording, the logic, the rationale, the spirit of the whole so-called vision for peace has been there in the right-wing Israeli literature for long. If we read the writings of Netanyahu himself, this is exactly what he has been speaking of since decades. In the 1990s, he has written a lot about the same logic that he wanted in the very beginning. It was very obvious that the plan has been drafted, if we can call it a plan. It has been drafted in Tel Aviv, not in Washington, D.C. It has been drafted by the Netanyahu team, Netanyahu office, not by Kushner, who is, I think there is no need to evaluate the man and his experience. It's so obvious. It's it's self-evident in a way. So I think the Palestinian reaction is the least that we could ever imagine. What could you imagine the Palestinians would say about a plan that has been drafted without their consent, that they were not consulted about it, a plan that would take their capital, a plan that would cut their countries and turn them into Bantustans, a plan that would turn them into an apartheid state, it would turn their existence, instead of having a Palestinian state, they would just live as third or fifth class citizens in an apartheid state, is just repeating the story of South Africa. So what would we expect the Palestinians would react? What else is there to react in such a situation?
Jafar, I wanted to ask you, the narrative, Jafar, that is spoken of sometimes, that Palestinians always give up options for peace, that they've always rejected peace. You've heard that argument, I'm sure, made many, many times in several media and by several Israeli officials and even U.S. officials sometimes. Even Kushner, when he heard that the Palestinians rejected this plan altogether, lashed out quite severely against them, also essentially paraphrasing what I've said earlier, that Palestinians were rejecting peace. Is that true?
Well, this Palestinians don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Was coined in the 1960s by the then foreign minister of Israel, Abba Eban. And of course, it's all three-card tricks. The world should know that the Israelis will never entertain a viable Palestinian state next to them. It has been the plan of the Zionist movement from the inception of the idea that Israel should be replacing Palestine, and they went about implementing it very meticulously, and they amassed a huge amount of money and forces and the media to sell it to the world, and they have. The unfortunate thing about this latest manifestation of a con artist deal. After all, Trump is a failed casino operator, and his son-in-law is a failed property developer. But they are playing chess with Palestine, and they have shown, as Hassan said, utter disrespect for the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people. What Mr. Abbas should have done is not just rejected. This is no good.
Okay.
He does not fail to disappoint, I'm afraid. The Palestinian people will not accept any compromise that steps on their dignity, steals their land, and gives them maybe the shade in the garden of their mansion. This is not acceptable. This is illegal. This is against international norms, and it's totally inhuman. Mr. Abbas would have done much better for himself and for us had he not gone to the Security Council and went to Gaza and prepared the huge divide that has been occurring in the Palestinian society for the 13 years.
Yeah, Jafar, on that point, I apologize for cutting you off. To be fair to Mahmoud Abbas, wasn't there actually a meeting that was recently held in Gaza, and isn't that actually in the works possibly for Abbas to visit? I mean, that's at least what I've heard the previous round that I spoke about this topic with other guests after the plan was revealed by the White House, that there is now talk of more unity, and is that need to be had urgently at this point in time.
You just said the magic word, talk. They are talking. Mr. Abbas should have gone to Gaza and, if you like, embarrassed Ismail Haniyeh into standing next to him and all the Islamic factions and others to say, look, this is an imminent danger. We are going backwards. We've got to formulate a plan to oppose and quell this. What he should have done first is denounce Israel and remove his acceptance of Israel as a state. He should remove the acceptance that the PLO gave Israel in 1988. He should have revoked the PA. The PA has not been nothing but a disaster for the Palestinians. And most importantly, he should have stopped the security coordination, because the Palestinians can deal with the Israelis, but they cannot deal with the Israelis with their brethren gun at their back.
Okay, let me bring in Gideon into the conversation. Gideon, do you think anybody where you're sitting in Tel Aviv or in other places really believe that this plan can actually work? I mean, is that something that they really believe that they can convince the Palestinians to really go through with this? Or do you think that they knew from the get-go that this was going to be rejected? And then what now happens? What exactly are they hoping and expecting happens?
Nobody bothered even to try to convince the Israelis, the Palestinians. It was a total one-sided game, and I couldn't agree more with my colleagues, Hassan and Jafar. They both put the finger on the right points. This is not a peace plan. It didn't aim to be a peace plan. It is a peace to implement the Israeli annexation. It is a plan to put the final end to the two-state solution. I think the two-state solution was never born, but now it's finally dead. And it is the alternative plan to any kind of peace plan, namely declaring that Israel will continue to govern the Palestinians forever in all kinds of different forms, more easy forms, more liberal forms, but by the end of the day, the United States told the Palestinians, forget about freedom, you will never get it.
And do you think then that everyone is expecting the Palestinians, or let me put it this way, how is everyone in Israel expecting the Palestinians to actually react to this? Are they hoping for street protests? What exactly are they hoping will happen? Because, again, as you said, they weren't even consulted. They knew that this would be rejected at some level. They must have some plan for what's to come.
I think, and I say it with a lot of sorrow, that the Palestinians are maybe in one of the lowest points ever. In one of my pieces, if you allow me to quote myself,
sure.
I called it the third Nakba. The first Nakba in 48, they lost their land, and the second Nakba in 67, they call it Naksa. They lost their freedom, and now they lost the remains of their hope. That's the truth, and as terrible as it sounds, they have very little that they can do right now, because this combination of an indifferent West, which goes more and more to the right, including a strong wave of Islamophobia in the world, with Donald Trump in the White House and Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, this combination is by far too powerful, and total apathy of the Arab world, which don't bother to interfere in any kind of way, and in many ways even supports this plan. Part of the Arab countries support this plan. So they are really left alone, bleeding, and they can do very, very little, because whatever they tried, and they tried everything, failed.
Yeah. Okay, so Hassan, let me bring you back. What options do you think the Palestinians have at this time?
I think it's quite obvious that the Palestinian side is the weakest side, if we can put it in this sense. It's the side that is left with the least amount of options. It is the one that can hardly affect the flow of events. Yet, that doesn't mean that Palestinians are totally helpless or they cannot do anything. I believe the first thing that the Palestinians can do right now is national reconciliation. Second, they can directly move to the United Nations to demand more resolutions from the UNGA to make it clear that this plan does not reflect the international community's consensus on the issue. On a third level, they can continue with the several campaigns to hold Israel accountable and to call for the boycott of Israel on all levels. I think following the steps that the South African struggle has followed a few decades ago could be something useful for the Palestinians. Right now, Palestinians have tried all kinds of options. Yasser Arafat has started in the 1950s and then 60s, and this has turned into a very handicapped Oslo agreement. Then Mahmoud Abbas tried to be as naive as possible and offer everything he could offer to get the least of a solution that could be offered. Yet we witness right now that Mahmoud Abbas has been betrayed by his partners who are supposed to reach a deal agreement with him. We all hear Danny Danon yesterday in the UN ambassador to the United Nations speaking and asking Mahmoud Abbas to step down, even though Mahmoud Abbas has been the most, the most cooperative in the peace process since the very beginning of it, and yet he is seen as someone who did not offer enough. So I think Palestinians right now have only one option, which is to act unilaterally on boycotting Israel, on naming Israel as it is an apartheid state that is established on the basis of the subjugation of one race for the service of the other, or for the service and in favor of the other. I think that's the only thing Palestinians can do right now.
Jafar, I'm going to ask you, a crystal ball question about what actually a sensible solution to all of this would be. The two-state solution is spoken about a lot, right? But many people say that that's not even really viable at this point in time, that only really one state where everyone has equal rights is what the actual solution should be. But then again, I always wonder, is it even possible to reach such a point where all of these peoples will be able to live side by side in peace?
The fact of the matter is, since 1967, there has been one state between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, and that state is called Israel. And Israel is an apartheid state. I'm going to quote Mr. Levy because I am a fan and I met him a couple of times. in one of his articles a few years ago, said Israel have 4 systems. One system for the Israelis in Israel, one system for the Arab citizens of Israel, another system is for the Palestinians in the West Bank, and the 4th system for the settlers in the West Bank. Gaza, forget it. Gaza is closed from air, from sea, from land. It's starved. Yeah. The water is polluted. The air is polluted. So there is one state already. But if you mean a one state, a democratic state, one man, one vote, like happened in South Africa, is not going to happen. Because the Zionist movement aim, as I said, from the inception of the idea, is all of Palestine, preferably without any Palestinians in it. And they are working on it. These are not my words. Yeah. These are the words of another Israeli historian whom I know, like Gideon knows, called Alain Pepé in his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine.
Yes.
I know it. I have a lot of Jewish friends in London and around the world, and I'm 67 years old. I lived it all my life.
Jafar, I'm going to cut you off. I do sincerely apologize. Unfortunately, the clock is getting the best of us. I just wanted to get a very, very quick final comment from you, Gideon. We just have under a minute left. On the points that Jafar there has made, and also on this point of one state versus 2 states, what are your thoughts?
My thought is permanently. There were many years that I thought that the 2-state solution is the best solution. 2 peoples share one piece of land. Let's share this land for the 2 peoples. This will enable self-determination for the Jewish people and for the Palestinian people. Israel did anything possible to make this solution impossible. And my guess is that we reach an irreversible stage in which continuing to speak about the 2-state solution plays to the hand of Israel, plays to the hand of the occupation, because nobody is going to evacuate 700,000 settlers. And therefore, we should change the discourse, and that's a hopeful final to your show, to change the discourse and to start to talk about the most basic thing, equal rights. This should be the struggle. And then, either Israel says no to equal rights and declare itself officially as an apartheid state, or the world will react as it did react with South Africa.
Okay. We'll leave there as a final comment. Appreciate Gideon, Jafar, and Hassan for their time, and of course, for putting this all into context for us, because what's been presented certainly will not stand. I mean, the Palestinians have already rejected it outright, but as Mahmoud Abbas had put at the United Nations Security Council, this is essentially what's been presented to the Palestinians, a Swiss cheese state. I mean, there's no better way to really put it, because it's really hard to even understand how any such state that has been presented at the White House would be viable. I mean, there's tunnels and et cetera, which it just doesn't make any logical sense how this would work. And then the Palestine state, as presented, would need to always be subservient in some fashion to an Israeli state, especially militarily. This certainly will not stand. But then what is to happen next? Will national reconciliation finally happen between the Palestinians? Will Mahmoud Abbas actually travel to Gaza and make that courageous decision to finally unite all the Palestinian factions? And then what happens? What are the next steps for the Palestinians? Because certainly at this point in time, it seems the ball is very much in their court. I'll leave it there for now. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss Sudan. Now, there is talk between the transitional government and other parties in that country that Omar al-Bashir will be sent to the International Criminal Court to face justice over crimes apparently committed in the Darfur region as well as otherwise. Now, the military seemingly is not on board. However, we're still waiting to see what the military will say. This is because the military, right after the ouster of al-Bashir, had said he would not be sent to the ICC. So will Sudan's al-Bashir face justice at the ICC? And what kind of a precedent will this then set for other leaders, not just in Africa, but around the world? Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Bola, Adediran, who is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of the West of England. He writes on African politics, the Security Council, as well as the responsibility to protect. He's joining us now from Bristol. Bola, as always, we appreciate your time today. What do you make of this decision on the part of the transitional government and others that Bashir should be sent to the ICC? Do you think this will actually occur, considering the military, of course, still wields a lot of power?
Well, thank you, Waqar, for having me. Yes, I read about the story and I was absolutely very surprised because of what you've mentioned earlier, which is that the military has been very it's been very clear right from the beginning that Omar al-Bashir would not be facing international justice. But again, I guess this is a clear indication of the influence of the civilian components of the Transitional Military Council that they've been able to bring about some form of justice by indicating that Omar al-Bashir may face the ICC. Now, what is also very clear is that these are early days, and that at the moment, indications are that whilst it might be the case that Omar al-Bashir would not be transported to the Hague, that other forms of arrangement would be had, where Omar al-Bashir will still face international justice, but within Sudan. And this is very interesting because on the one hand, it suits and it meets the conditions that the military has set from the beginning, but at the same time, it also meets the interests that civilians have in seeing that Omar al-Bashir is brought to justice. Of course, you will recall that Omar al-Bashir was recently sentenced to 2 years imprisonment for corruption charges, and a lot of people thought that was very tokenistic. So in some sense, the ICC is seen as a more neutral arbiter, a more international form of justice that could address many of Omar al-Bashir's historic crimes.
You know, whenever we talk about ICC and, war crimes against any respective leader, it's never that person alone who has acted in this regard, right? So there is a system, there's a group of people who have helped this person carry out those war crimes, alleged war crimes, of course, until they're proven in a court of law. So do you think that at some level there must be a lot of people within Sudan's establishment who are quite worried about their own standing at this point in time if Bashir does go to the ICC, and would that then present an obstacle?
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess this is part of the reason why the military, particularly, have been very vehement in the fact that they would not want to see justice done. Don't forget that members of the Transitional Military Council, some of them, even though they overthrew, they participated in the overthrow of Omar al-Bashir, but many of them had important roles to play, even in many of these crimes that Omar al-Bashir is being accused of. General Mdeti, for example, is one of those individuals who occupies a prominent role in the Transitional Military Council, but also led militias against the Darfur rebels a couple of years ago. So an indictment of Omar al-Bashir obviously immediately implicates many of the people in the Transitional Military Council. So we can obviously understand where they are coming from and their reluctance to see that international justice is being done. Yes.
I wonder, though, do you agree that Bashir, let me put it this way, in your opinion, do you think Bashir did commit war crimes when it came to Darfur and the other conflicts? Because on his point of view and his side and his supporters, they say, listen, these are all allegations which have yet to be proven, that there's no evidence for all of the above. And Bashir, as you well know, even since the ICC's wanted him, has been able to travel to many countries who have refused to then hand him over to the ICC as well. That means he still wields some support in this regard?
Oh, yes. As with many dictators across the world, because of the long influence they've had in those countries, they would always have supporters. Bashir was in charge of Sudan for 30 years. And so it is not surprising that you would have Sudanese who still believe that Bashir was innocent and all sorts of things. But it's very, very clear, even as far as early as 2003, 2004, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress determined that genocide was being committed in Darfur, and of course, Omar Bashir was implicated in all of those. Now, is Omar Bashir very guilty? I think absolutely. From the circumstantial evidence that we have, is led a campaign of genocide and almost ethnic cleansing against the Jafaris, and that is very, very clear. Is used the indications were that he used the Janjaweeds to clear a huge part of the opposition against him. But I think what is also very important for me to quickly note is that Omar Bashir is guilty is very clear. It's very obvious. That it would be successfully prosecuted by the ICC is a different question entirely. The ICC has made a complete mess of its recent prosecutions. I mean, you can immediately recall the acquittal of Bemba, the former vice president of the Central African Republic. You can also immediately recall the acquittal of Laurent Gbagbo and his allies, and the criticisms of the ICC would not abate, has not abated because of that prosecutorial mistakes and mess that is found itself in recent times. So I think the more important question is that if Omar Bashir faces the ICC, would it result in a successful prosecution? I am not completely sure about that because of the history of the ICC. The ICC has sat over more acquittals than prosecutions, and that is what the evidence here is.
Okay, so let's take that macro issue which you brought up how the ICC has acted so far, and let's turn it on its head in another way, because there is criticism, as you well know, Bola, that the ICC has acted unfairly and has targeted Africa when it comes to the cases that are brought forth before it, and that it isn't going, after other countries around the world as well who have been alleged to have committed war crimes and/or their forces or respective individuals within those countries. Is that a fair criticism? Is it fair for African leaders and Africans generally feel that the ICC is unfairly, in a sense, targeting them?
I think I would answer your question by saying that it's on two. We could respond to that in two ways. On one hand, there is clear evidence that and it doesn't look good for the optics to see that the history of convictions, the history, and the ICC has been overly focused on Africa, and a lot of its cases have been opened within the continent. But it's also the case that a lot of those cases were in fact brought by African states themselves, who self-referred to the ICC, and that is one part of the discussion that a lot of people carefully neglect. It is also not. It is not also not. It is also not far from the truth that, because of the nature of conflicts within Africa, because of the historical nature of genocides, ethnic cleansings, and civil wars, that more cases will be open in Africa just by that reason alone. So yes, it is obviously not good for the optics that a lot of the cases that ICC has been overly focused in Africa, and that there are tons of criminal violations of international law by other countries in other parts of the world that have been curiously neglected. But it's also not far from the truth that Africa has had a particular problem with crimes, particular international crimes. And that is one thing that we cannot sidestep. Also, as I mentioned, the fact that African countries have self-referred is worthy of note.
Indeed, that is worthy of note. Well, as our final point, Bola, but of course, as always, we appreciate you taking your time to share your insight with us on this. Now, viewers, as Bola there mentioned at the end, it is interesting that the ICC has brought forth cases mainly really just against African leaders so far in its tenure. And there's many Africans who would criticize it for that reason. However, there is a flip side, as Bola there said, where we need to understand the context of this. It seems like Africa is self-policing itself. It's bringing forth cases against seemingly its own leaders, its own dictators, and that can only really be a good thing, can't it? Or is it, as many would see it, that it's just an unfair targeting of the continent and the countries that make up the continent as well? On the topic of Omar Bashir himself, of course, these are allegations at this point in time of war crimes committed during the Darfur conflict. Will the military even allow this to go through? Because the military at the beginning, when Bashir was ousted not too long ago, said he would not be brought forth in front of the ICC, and that he's only really serving right now a 2-year sentence, as Bola also said. And the context of that, again, many people are saying that after a 30-year dictatorial rule, 2 years in jail really is a bit of a joke, isn't it? Even if it's just against allegations of corruption and otherwise. We'll keep a close eye on that because, of course, this sets important precedents continually for Africa and for the world and other dictators and those who are committed or alleged to have committed war crimes who are watching, certainly with bated eyes, to see what would happen to them as well. I'll be back with my next segment after this. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss news that has been making the rounds around the world, and that is about the CIA as well as the BND, which is the American and German intelligence services, respectively, that have been found out now to have been supporting a global encryption company by the name of Crypto AG, which allowed the CIA and German intelligence to actually eavesdrop within its communications equipment that was sold then to many countries around the world. So basically, these intelligence agencies were not just eavesdropping on those countries, but they were also making money in the process because those countries were buying this very communications equipment, then giving them, of course, a huge advantage. Now, all of this began in the 1970s. As we well know, in these ensuing years, then we've had the likes of Edward Snowden speaking about the fact that the NSA has been misusing, of course, many communications to be able to spy even on allies. And Edward Snowden has, of course, paid a price for that as well. He is now, of course, in exile outside of the United States. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're now joined by Stefano Vernole, who is the former director of Eurasia, Journal of Geopolitical Studies, and coordinator of the Center Studies of Eurasian Mediterranean. He is joining us now from Bologna in Italy. Stefano, thanks for your time today. What do you make of this report? Is it concerning that the CIA and BND were spying on many countries, even allies?
I think this news is not a great surprise because 20 years ago is revealed the role of Echelon in spy of European allied and to spy the communication in the entire world. The fundamental problem for us, for Italy, for example, is the member of Atlantic Alliance, because if you are an allied, you don't spy me. This is the problem. And in general, the problem of cybersecurity that shows Edward Snowden a few years ago is a fundamental challenge for sovereignty of all states in the world now.
So do you think that, Stefano, that a lot of what we're hearing now is only coming out because of people who have spoken about it? So we can talk about Edward Snowden or other people who have revealed that this sort of spying even happens.
I think that is up and nothing, because the Swiss government is theoretical and neutral, but is under the pressure of the United States for banking system international. And the Swiss don't have the force for to balance the pressure of the United States about this issue. Yeah. And the allied of the United States are not allied, but his secondary country respect the force of the United States. I think in public opinion, in NATO alliance, Atlantic Alliance country, this is not a great news. It's probably an issue of discussion for countries like Russia and China that are opposite to United States.
All right, we'll leave it there, Stefano, but we appreciate, of course, your time today and, of course, your insight. That was Stefano Vernole speaking to us there from Bologna in Italy. This issue of the CIA as well as the BND using this sort of communications equipment, especially in those years where it began, in the 1970s again. And we can talk about a lot of very important political events and geopolitical events which have happened in the ensuing years, through which the Americans as well as the Germans had a lot of information about what was actually happening in respective countries, even allied countries at times, and they were able to then take advantage of that. Was that a fair advantage or not? Is it all fair when it comes to intelligence services and intelligence agencies and the advantages that they use to be able to get a leg up on their enemies or even their allies? That, of course, will be something that's up for debate, I'm sure, at this point in time within intelligence communities. But as Stefano there said, it's no surprise that this has happened, certainly. We'll keep a close eye as this story continues to develop and reactions continue to come in. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.